Imagine you're 12 and you just enjoy living your life at home with your family. Now imagine that your parents are dead and you are abducted and forced against your will to murder people in cold blood until you die or until you escape. Now, if this does describe what your life has been, I am so sorry. But for most of you, it doesn't. Regardless, this is the image that most people think of when they hear the words child and soldier said together in some fashion, forming child soldier, such as child soldier. And this is quite often the only thing people imagine when they hear child soldier, and this is where we run into trouble. First of all, let me define a child soldier. According to the UN, a child soldier is, quote, any person below 18 years of age who is or who has been recruited or used by an armed force or armed group in any capacity, including, but not limited to, boys and girls used as fighters, cooks, porters, spies, or for sexual purposes, end quote. And according to Human Rights Watch, there are currently hundreds of thousands of child soldiers, some as young as 8 years old. Now, when we try to fight child soldier recruitment with the idea that it is propagated by abductions, people start to assume drug lords and socio-political extremist groups are the only real villains, and by stopping them, we can end this problem for good. But this is not how every child is recruited. In David Rosen's book, Child Soldiers in the Western Imagination, he quotes a 2014 statistic that shows 7 nations actively recruit children in their armed forces: Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Myanmar, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, and Yemen. Many other countries don't appear on this list because they depend on paramilitary groups to recruit children, so that official recruitment stays 18 and older. Aside from paramilitary groups, children are actively recruited by rebel forces, revolutionaries, guerrillas, regional, tribal, ethnic, and religious militants, local defense organizations, insurgents, and, of course, global terrorist networks. If all of these groups, especially the 7 officially recognized countries, were getting their child soldiers through abductions, the gross violation of human rights would spark more outrage than this current crisis. But this is not how every child is recruited. According to the War Child Foundation, a large portion of child soldiers are volunteers or are volunteered by their families. It is often incredibly easy to convince a child to enlist, not only because many of the children are often poor, orphaned, living in a war zone, or uneducated, and therefore looking for a way to escape that life, but due to their developing brains, children are also generally more likely to make impulsive, risky, or dangerous decisions and get into fights or accidents of all kind, according to a 2011 AACAP study. And this results in children joining up with armed groups, often not knowing what they are getting themselves into. But foreign countries and the third world aren't the only places we see this behavior. According to a European study, minors were responsible for 11.2% of all crimes in 1999 in the UK, 19.3% in Germany, 21.3% in France, and in Switzerland. In Switzerland, minors accounted for 28.8% of all crimes. Keep in mind that minors only account for 25% of the population. In a more recent study, in 2013, in the US, even after one of the most significant crime drops over the past 20 years, in just serious crimes alone, i.e. rape, murder, assault, robbery through threat, etc., minors accounted for 17% of crimes. And there were 3 times as many offenders in 1999 when the other numbers were taken. You do the math. According to the National Criminal Justice Reference Service, or NCJRS, a significant portion of these children came from poor, uneducated, single-parent or fewer backgrounds, and rates of youth criminal activity in areas with gang problems are significantly higher as well. These are directly comparable to the most common situations for child soldiers, coming from a poor, orphaned, or parental figure lacking uneducated background and living in a war zone or a gang area. It doesn't matter where children are, the same types of upbringing bring about the same type of person. It's just a bit more extreme in the countries where children have AR-15s instead of Glocks. Children with less than desirable upbringings will look to whatever gets them out of it, and often joining crime or armed groups seems like the only way to do so. This means that solving the child soldier problem is not so different from ending juvenile crime in the United States and elsewhere. It starts with education. According to economist Enrico Moretti, the current difference in education levels of white and black men accounts for 23% of the higher incarceration rates for black men. Children who have an education are significantly less likely to participate in criminal activity and less likely to be recruited by armed groups. Children with an education tend to not feel like the only way out of that life is to fall into violence. They can get a job, they can make good, decent money. The problem is that education just isn't accessible enough. Poor families often rely on their children to get jobs or start working as soon as possible to help support the family, and this means low attendance rates and low graduation rates, and more children who think that the only way forward is to become a soldier. And while it is incredibly hard to obtain accurate statistics on lesser developed countries, Columbia University showed that in the United States alone, increasing the high school graduation rate of men by just 1% would save the United States $1.4 billion in costs from crime. A 10% increase would show a 20% lowering of murders and assaults, a 13% lowering of motor vehicle theft, and an 8% lowering of arson. The law of diminishing returns means that no matter how much effort we put into stopping crime or stopping the recruitment of child soldiers, we will never be able to prevent 100% of it. There will always be at least one child soldier, but we can work towards that number by increasing the availability and the effectiveness of education so we can get away from the multiple hundreds of thousands of child soldiers currently in action today. All we just gotta is be of the schools good for the alls people. Thanks for listening.